Hello, YouTube. Today I'm going to be reacting to some of the news of the day. So, the pharmacare bill has passed in the House of Commons. It heads to the Senate. And just a recap on this bill, it's only covering insulin or diabetes medications and contraceptives. So, still in a very rudimentary phase. Presumably, the goal of the NDP and the Liberals is to see this expanded to cover all prescription drugs, which I think is a big problem actually, because when you have basically unlimited ability to pay, as you have with the federal government, and then you have these artificial restrictions on supply, like we see with the patent system for pharmaceuticals, I think that this can lead to skyrocketing prices paid. So, advocates of pharmacare say that by negotiating, um, like by pooling our buying power and negotiating, we're going to end up with lower costs. That's the argument in favor of pharmacare. But I think that the opposite is possible because of that aforementioned unlimited ability to pay. I think another potential issue is with the opioid crisis in Canada. What happens when the government is footing the bill for opioid medication that is then getting resold on the street? This is going to encourage, or has the potential to encourage, opioid abuse and encourage opioid resellers, that is, people that have a prescription for opioids that receive them and sell them on the street. Um, Offer first payer coverage of some contraceptives and diabetes medications. The other thing with uh, type 2 diabetes is that it's, well, essentially, it can be handled simply by eliminating carbs. If you eat like a carnivore diet of just protein and fat, then it basically stops diabetes, type 2 diabetes. Anyway, I'm not a fan of this pharmacare policy. I think that what we're seeing is socialism through incrementalism, where the government just slowly takes over more and more of the economy. And, this whole attitude of what can we get for free from the government, I think is very destructive. You don't get something from nothing. And it reminds me of the quote, um, which is that government is that great fiction whereby everyone tries to live at the expense of everyone else. Bastiat said that, and it's not too long until you realize that we're not the everyone; we are the everyone else. So I think that rather than the government playing Santa Claus, it's better for people to just sort of buy their own stuff and not look for freebies from the government. So it's not clear yet exactly what drugs will be covered. Negotiations, 1.5 billion over 5 years. And so moving on, we've got Bank of Canada. Bank of Canada could cut its benchmark interest rate up to 3 times before the Federal Reserve begins moving rates lower, say economists, downplaying the risk of a widening policy gap between the central banks. So basically, economic growth in Canada has not been happening for a long time now, for a decade now. We've got a stagnant economy, and the hope here on the part of, well, these analysts is that the Bank of Canada can lower interest rates and stimulate economic growth, or will. This to me, this is like a false hope. I don't think that real long term economic growth is going to happen because of tinkering with the interest rate. Um, what we really need is actually like a stronger anti-inflation approach, because so long as you have inflation, and we still have inflation, um, lowering the interest rate is going to trigger more inflation, because the way they lower the interest rate is by the Bank of Canada purchasing government bonds, and this increases the money supply, so it is inflationary. Um, so so long as we continue to have pretty high inflation, um, which I guess you could quibble about whether like 3 or 4% is high inflation or normal inflation, but so long as you have this constant inflation, then then people aren't going to save money. Um, and if you, I mean, we see this in Canada. So if you look at this chart here, courtesy with data from Statistics Canada, you can see that in 1982, the household savings rate was 20%, and by 2014, it had fallen to 3.6%. At the moment, it's about 6% in 2024. So uh, that would be about here, which is um, basically in line with the peaks of the last decade. And so long as you have these very low savings rates, it's going to be very difficult to have robust economic growth. People are going to be consuming. In fact, we have a debt based economy where not only are people consuming all of their income, they're consuming their income and their future income as well. So we've got this debt based economy, this consumption based economy, which is fine, if that's how you want to live, but that that takes away from economic growth, because the pathway for economic growth is, instead of consuming, you abstain from consumption and you invest that money instead. So, yeah. So by by cutting interest rates, this is only going to worsen the inflation and presumably um, encourage consumers spending, and discourage the savings we need for long term economic growth.
Be able to have a good standard of living with that kind of wage.
As of June 1st, BC's minimum wage has gone from $16.75 to now $17.40. And Metro Vancouver's living wage is over $25 an hour. But is this enough to keep low-paying workers afloat in one of the most expensive cities in Canada?
There's a lot of people who are really struggling in this city. Wages have not kept pace with the cost of living.
We're going to lose young people building their careers.
Anastasia French with Living Wage for Families BC says the BC government should increase minimum wage to at least $20 an hour.
Housing costs and food costs, which are the two biggest essentials that any of us need to get by, have skyrocketed. And that means that increases to the minimum wage are really small, insubstantial to actually how much it's costing to get by right now.
I actually was working in a minimum wage job and left. I was just covering my rent, and I felt that I didn't really have any expendable income.
60% of workers in Metro Vancouver that don't earn a living wage are women.
French says the $8 gap between a minimum and living wage is hurting a lot of families.
Do they pay for gas today? Do they pay for groceries today? And often they have to then work additional jobs just to make ends meet on top of then their full-time job.
In a statement, the Minister of Labour says they have tied minimum wage to general inflation and, quote, future increases will continue to be tied to the annual rate of inflation.
We also are asking the government to take real action on affordability, because if we can lower these costs, lower the cost of housing, lower the cost of food, that closes that gap between the minimum wage and the living wage, and it makes it easier for employers to step up and pay a living wage.
Housing and food are human rights. So as a business owner myself, I'm all for keeping pace as best we can, because we're still not there.
In Vancouver, Angela Bowers, City News.
Yeah, so there's a legitimate issue here, which is the affordability crisis. As the video said, rent and groceries have been exceeding wages, exceeding inflation. And for lower income individuals, this is very difficult. The problem is that the minimum wage is the wrong way to address these issues, because all the impact of the minimum wage is purely prohibitory. It doesn't actually cause anyone's wages to be increased. It simply makes it a crime to hire any low-skilled worker at a rate that is commensurate with their abilities. So the best way to address wages, the best way to increase wages is actually, again, by targeting inflation, because the condition necessary for rapid wage increases is one where there's no inflation. For the same reason, no inflation leads to savings, leads to investment, leads to increased productivity, increased capital stock per worker, and higher wages. And we know this by studying economic history. Technological development is also important, but we've got that, with AI and other technological developments. So, part of the problem is that Vancouver is a very desirable place to live, and there's not really anything you can do about that when demand, or the quantity demanded increases, supply stays the same. You're gonna have higher prices, and everybody wants to live in Vancouver. You've got a lot of people coming from China and Asia that want to live in Vancouver, because there's no winter there, or a very mild winter there. There's no snow during the winter. There is a winter, but it gets down to like +6 or something Celsius. That's the coldest. So yeah, basically like to address wages, you need to address monetary policy, and it really all comes back to money and banking, and but so the minimum wage is the wrong way to deal with this, because what the minimum wage is going to do is it's going to price low skilled workers out of the marketplace. If I have a productivity of only $12 an hour and the minimum wage is $17 an hour, then my that job, whatever it would have been, that I would have had that productivity of $12 an hour in, say, doing surveys over the phone, uh, that job just won't exist. And if it's hard to make your ends meet on $12 an hour, it's much harder on 17. Now, this whole nonsense of a living wage being $20 an hour, pretty ridiculous. I mean, you could rent a room in maybe not Vancouver proper, but the greater Vancouver area, Surrey or whatever, for $1,000, $1,200. So I mean, $15 an hour times 40 hours a week, 60. Yeah, 2,400. I mean, after your room, 200, 300 for groceries. If you're one person and you're very careful about what you're eating, then what, you need a transit pass. I mean, you could get by on 1,700, 1,500. If you shared a room, that would cut your cost by like 500 or 600. I mean, what the it seems to me that the living wage is really like a thriving wage, like where you have a car or cell phone plan, like um, you go out 4 times a month and drink or whatever. Like anyway, yeah, the minimum wage, it's the wrong approach, and I don't know. These people should move to a cheaper town. They should move to Edmonton or something. Uh, yeah.
Walk down an aisle. I will never have the first dance.
Grieving over milestones that will never happen. Greg Sword agonizing over the death of his 14-year-old daughter, Camilla.
I feel like a failure.
Camilla died from an overdose of MDMA, cocaine, and hydromorphone in 2022. Before that, Sword says he desperately wanted to help his daughter, but was told she needed to consent to treatment.
Isn't a child in a hospital an outcry for help? That should be the number one sign that that kid needs help.
Alberta has a Protection of Children Abusing Drugs Act, also known as the PCHAD program, allowing guardians to have their child taken involuntarily for detox and assessment, with approval from a judge.
If I lived in a different province, I could have forced my daughter into rehab.
Forcing teenaged youth into programs, it might work for a handful, but it is going to backfire.
Lana Green says she was desperate and got a judge to order her son, Timothy McConnell, into the PCHAD program.
This one thing that I thought was going to help him pushed him further away from me. And I just see it as the beginning of the end, is what it was.
Green says after the program, he left home and continued to use substances until he died by suicide 6 years later in the Edmonton Remand Center. Critics of involuntary confinement say programs can harm the relationship between parents and children, increasing their substance use.
They can sometimes conclude that the systems and services in place are absolutely not trying to help them, they're trying to control them, and actually become very, very effective at evading care.
She says BC needs to do more to compel youth into care.
We really want to be drawing young people into a place that they trust, where they can develop trusting relationships with workers, providers, and peers.
The ministry says the safety of youth is our top priority, especially when it comes to ensuring they have access to the care they need following a substance use emergency. Sword says he knows PCHAD isn't the perfect answer, but believes it might have made a difference.
Now, I've got nothing. I've got my daughter in ashes because I wasn't given any chance to save her.
Angela Jung, Global News.
Yeah, that's really tragic. Um, and this is a big problem right now, especially in Vancouver, in a lot of American cities as well, Portland and San Francisco. Um, and there's no easy answers, you know. As a libertarian, you know, I've advocated for the legalization of drugs, and seeing some of the results of decriminalization and just witnessing, you know, the harm caused by drug addiction has really made me question the merits of that. You know, as a culture, as a society, should we be promoting drug use? And and you know, I think the video made a good point of stressing the potential downsides of involuntary rehab, um, and breaking the connection between parents and children, and you know, it's so sad when a parent outlives a child, and when those deaths are unnecessary. So, um, yeah, I don't have any easy answers or solutions. I think this is a societal problem, you know, that needs to be dealt with. Rehab seems to be a good choice. You know, there's programs like Outward Bound, you know, where they can rehab while going on sort of a journey uh, in the Canadian North. You know, they're doing uh, portaging and canoeing, and I think that's got a lot of potential. Um, you know, if you can get away from the environment that's causing the drug abuse. The other thing is uh, you know, if we can help people build more fulfilling lives for themselves, um, economic integration into society, maybe improvements in the educational system so that it's more challenging or more involved with some of these people. Um, you know, it's definitely, I think this is definitely one of the great challenges of our generation, and you know, something that we need to think about, we need to study, we need to read more solutions on. I know RFK Jr. He's proposing um, a lot of rehab centers that are funded by like taxes on weed, or that's one approach. Um, you know, part of the problem too does come from prohibition, because like through prohibition, uh, people turn to like more potent substances. So like heroin was prohibited, so drug dealers would turn to fentanyl, which I guess is easier to smuggle because it's so much more potent. Um, so yeah, it's just tragic, really. What's going on with drug use, and maybe we need cultural changes. Maybe we need changes in our society, changes in our legal system. Uh, Maybe we need more rehab centers, and I don't think that forcible rehab is necessarily the solution. I think that for somebody to get clean, they have to want to get clean. Um, but at the same time, just being away from from drugs for a while can definitely have that positive impact and allow people to get their heads on straight. Um, Here's another article. Should Wegovy, the 400 a month obesity medication, be covered by the provinces? So Wegovy is the same, has the same active ingredient as Ozempic, which has been in the news as a successful weight loss drug, but Wegovy has a higher dose of the active ingredient, semaglutide. I mean, as an obese person myself, in fact, morbidly obese, but realistically, I do think that obesity is not a disease, but rather the consequence of eating too much. So, I don't know if medical intervention is the right way to go about it. I mean, by all means, if it works for you, that's good. I also don't see why people who make the better choices and eat more responsibly should be forced to subsidize individuals that do not have the same good decision making or willpower. We know it's possible for obese people to lose weight. Some of them do it. Obviously, habits can be very difficult to break. There's also, with any medical treatment, you have the potential for serious side effects. So it's better to lose weight naturally. Fasting can be a great approach, especially in periods of up to 2 to 3 days. I think it doesn't have to be that long. It could be 12 hours. It could be 6 hours. Uh, Simply abstaining from eating can be a powerful approach for weight loss. I mean, I shouldn't really say anything because I'm not like a. I need to lose a lot of weight myself, so. Uh, but I don't think that the government should really be financing these drugs. I think that really this whole Ozempic situation is just emblematic of society that does not want to accept that actions have consequences. That what we do impacts on our lives. I mean, as a society, people are constantly passing the buck and blaming other people. Well, when it comes to your weight, I mean, there's basically there's nobody you can blame. That's just the consequences of how much you eat or how much more you eat than you need to eat. Uh, our body has certain needs, in terms of rebuilding destroyed muscle throughout the day, and the caloric intake we need to for our body to function. And if you eat more than that, then you're gonna store weight. Especially um, if you eat like a lot of uh, high calorie snacks like fat and sugar together, like ice cream. I mean, the reality is that our diets have changed a lot in the last 100 years. We have access to foods that historically we didn't really have access to, and it's so easy to consume a lot of calories, a lot of empty calories, and at the same time, people are less active than ever before. So, uh, yeah, I think that people need to accept responsibility for their decisions and realize the consequences of their decisions. And it's not easy. It can be very difficult, and I appreciate that. But I think that everybody has that ability. There's a great book actually. It's called The Way to Willpower. It was written by Henry Hazlitt, published by the Mises Institute. It's not a political book, although the Mises Institute is a political organization, think tank, what have you. But The Way to Willpower, it's basically a guidebook on how to have really strong willpower. And if you read that and do as it suggests, you'll have the willpower to achieve a lot of things. So, bottom line, I don't think that the government should be funding Wegovy. People want to try this medication. That's on them. A lot of people have had really negative side effects from it. If it works for you, that's great. But my advice is to try a low carb or carnivorous diet, or at least just eat less and see how that goes. All right, the latest from Al Jazeera. Trump campaign says it raised $141 million in May. Who are these people donating to Trump? Boosted by guilty verdict. Trump camp says 53 million contributed in 24 hours after he was found guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records. Which, by the way, sounds like one of those nonsense crimes. Like, it's not that anybody was defrauded, which could be a thing, but falsifying business records sounds like sort of one of those victimless crimes. Like, you shouldn't even have to report all this stuff to the IRS, which shouldn't exist in the first place. So it's like you weren't completely complying with the state's demand that you document every aspect of your life for them to pick apart and make sure that they're getting every shekel they want from you. Uh, now I don't know all the details of this case. I haven't really been following it. So it's possible if like shareholders were defrauded, if that was part of that, then then there would be a legitimate charge there. Uh, well, let's get into it. Trump was charged with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records to conceal payments made to the pornographic actress Stormy Daniels. Okay, not bad. Uh, to ensure her silence about a sexual encounter between them and costs relating to this transaction totaling $420,000. That is a lot of money. The DA accused Trump of falsifying these business records with the intent to commit other crimes, such as violation of federal campaign finance limits, unlawfully influencing the 2016 U.S. presidential election, and tax fraud. See, so right here is where they lose me because none of these things should be crimes in my libertarian worldview. I don't believe in campaign finance reform limits, which, by the way, I mean, just the fact that the establishment politicians pass them should tell you right there that they're not like all about keeping powerful interests in check, but what they're really about doing is making sure nobody can compete with these established political organizations that have no problem getting 3,000 or 5,000 or whatever dollars from 10,000 different donors because they've these massive organizations uh, that can do that. But what they're really about is preventing one billionaire from backing an independent candidate and saying I'll give him as much as you can raise. Let's have a fair fight. That's what they're about. They're about crushing independent candidates that have a wealthy donor or two. Uh, and tax fraud. I mean, I don't. The real fraud is the taxes. Okay, I don't think that somebody who commits tax fraud is doing something immoral. So, uh, now, so it looks like the Trump campaign was using money donated to it to pay off Stormy Daniels. That seems like a little more of a tricky issue. I mean, people are donating to your campaign with the expectation that you use that money to run to office. That does seem to be uh, like a breach there. Well, I don't know. It looks like the checks were from Donald J. Trump, the Trump Revocable Trust. Like it looks like the money came from Trump himself via his lawyer Cohen. In which case, there's no real problem. Anyway, I really do think that these prosecutions are politically motivated. You had the judges in Colorado saying that Trump couldn't even be on the ballot, which is preposterous. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Trump. He's not a libertarian. I think he's sort of a run of the mill president. He didn't start any wars, which is pretty good, but uh, he certainly is nowhere near what a good president could be. He wasn't vetoing all the bills. He could have done a lot better than he did. But I think that this is a political witch hunt. The Democratic Party is threatened by Trump, and so they're engaged in these very very questionable prosecutions of him, and 2 million donations, averaging $70. So a lot of smaller supporters, a lot of individual support there former president. Ah, this is crazy. Time to defund. Conservative MPs blast CBC for opting not to air Oilers' semi-final victory. What could they have been thinking? I mean, hockey is so big in Canada. I've never actually really gotten into it, but I mean, Canadians are fanatical about hockey. It seems absurd that the CBC would opt not to air the Oilers if they're so deep. Yeah, they're the last Canadian team in the playoffs, and I mean, it seems like something that the CBC would be covering live. Now, I'm very much in favor of shutting down the CBC. I think that there's some good things for sure. Growing up, I used to love this hour has 22 minutes, and the news used to be decent. CBC radio is pretty good, but still, it's not worth the cost to the taxpayer, and they've gone so woke in recent years. It's pretty absurd. What I'd like to see done, shut it down. And there's about $2 billion in assets in the CBC, which could be, auctioned off. There's some prime real estate locations in Toronto and in Montreal. So shut it down, auction off the constituent parts, save the taxpayers some money. We really shouldn't have state-run media, and yeah, shut it down. Let's keep TVO. TVO, I think, is solid. Uh, Steve Bacon, he's the man. We'll keep TVO, but let's get rid of CBC. You've seen those signs that say, "In emergency, break glass." This is going to be like an intolerable think piece. Well, it's time to break the glass, warned Carolyn Rogers, Senior Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, in a recent speech on Canada's sluggish economic growth. Surely that might be worth checking out. Inflation, high cost of living, and insufficient growth rates continue to dominate Canada's political narrative. Since 2019, Canada's economy has grown by an intolerably slow rate of roughly 1%, 1.5% a year. Presumably, they're judging by the GDP metric. But keep in mind, too, that we've had really high immigration. Um, that's faster than European states like the United Kingdom and Germany, but much less than the United States. Within the overall gloomy picture, Canada's digital sector has been one of the few bright spots. Since 2019, the output of the information and communications technology sector has grown by 21%. Data processing was up by 52%, and computer systems design was up by 39%. In particular, within Canada's digital sector, mobile application development and support has turned out to be a vibrant source of growth. Apps are no longer just about playing games or scrolling through social networks. Instead, people are using apps to connect with their healthcare providers, interact with their cars, and for banking and shopping. At the same time, mobile apps have become increasingly important to all sorts of businesses. Apps to track trucks, to monitor energy systems, and forestry operations. The Progressive Policy Institute has estimated there are 385,000 app economy jobs in Canada as of April 2024. So yeah, basically I was just talking about how the app sector, the technology sector, is a big part of the Canadian economy now, which, well, yeah, obviously. But here's the speech that it was referencing.
Arrived, had us feeling very underdressed. There was a lot of gowns and sequins and glitter, so I'm sure everybody enjoyed the Junos here this week. Halifax is a city that reminds us that Canada is an economy built on trade and immigration. And Halifax is not just a key port, it's also been the landing spot for countless new Canadians. So I'm particularly happy to be speaking to a group like Halifax Partnership, which is dedicated to helping Canadian businesses grow and thrive. We just passed the 4th anniversary of the beginning of the pandemic, if you can believe that. It was 4 difficult years. Beyond its human toll, the pandemic upended economies around the world and sparked the biggest global inflationary episode in decades. That, of course,
no, the pandemic didn't do that. Governments did that.
Led central banks, including the Bank of Canada, to raise interest rates sharply so we could get inflation under control. For the past 2 years or so, the bank's governing council has been laser focused on restoring price stability. And it's pretty much all we've talked about in our public speeches. And we've heard directly from Canadians who have struggled with inflation.
A stable price level alone is not enough. So that's been the policy of central banks for a long time. During the 1920s, this was the policy of the Federal Reserve, was a stable price level. And they succeeded in that CPI was relatively stable throughout the 1920s. But this was a period of substantial innovation, a rapidly growing economy. This is the 1920s in America, and technological development. So what we would expect with a stable money supply would be falling prices as the supply of goods increases and basically things get cheaper every year naturally. So when you have a stable price level in the context of a booming economy, you're still having inflation. You're still having prices going up because the money supply is expanding. It's just that that's balanced out by the natural deflation that comes with economic growth and increases in total output. So the real goal should be a stable money supply rather than simply aiming for and failing to have like a stable price level, because so long as because otherwise you still have the malinvestments that come about from artificial credit expansion, and which is the seeds of the boom bust business cycle,
and with the impacts of its cure, higher interest rates. The good news is that monetary policy is working, and inflation has come a long way down. We're not all the way back to target yet. We've still got some work to do to finish the job.
I mean, if monetary
but
inflation
we've made a lot of progress.
or monetary policy
and
is
so
working,
now,
then why have we had a stagnant economy for the last 10 years? You know, if you look at GDP per capita, not that I necessarily embrace the GDP statistic. I think that in many ways it's fundamentally flawed, but as a gross measure of the economy, I mean, it's one approach. It's certainly one championed by the financial class, by the economists like this individual here. So why has GDP per capita been stagnant over the last 10 years if monetary policy is working? And so I would submit that monetary policy is not working, that these people don't have a clue what they're doing, that what we need is sound money, a non-inflationary money supply, a money supply that's stable, so that your money isn't losing value every year, so that people are encouraged to save, so that funds are available for new investments in the economy, especially at the level of individuals instead of simply corporate investment. Um,
Now is a good time to reflect on how the economy has changed in Canada and around the world, and to think about what those changes mean for our future.
because I have nothing against corporations. I think actually corporations are awesome, but you do need small business as well. You need individual owner operators. Uh, you know, Often with corporations, um, they're they play a certain role in the economy, but there's a lot of advantages to smaller businesses as well. Uh, they can serve niche industries. Corporations are great for broad market, but a lot of the time there's underserved niches that are available. That can't really be met by a corporation, and a lot of the time, it's easier for to find employment with these smaller businesses. Whereas if you ever applied to work even an entry level role with a corporation, you know, uh, it's fill out these massive forms and you'll never hear from us again. I mean, monetary policy is extremely important because money is the lifeblood of the economy, and having a stable banking system, having a stable monetary supply is fundamental for having a healthy economy. We've seen the destruction brought about by hyperinflation or high inflation, Venezuela, Argentina, Turkey. These countries have serious problems because of runaway inflation, and even in the 2 to 5% per year category, which is more common in modern industrialized economies, inflation still has serious problems, um, and our 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 system of money, the fiat money system, needs to be reformed. We need a gold standard, a hard gold standard, or competing currencies. Even Bitcoin would be a lot better because it's at least a fixed amount of total Bitcoin that will be available once the uh, expansion of the Bitcoin supply stops, which it eventually will. So, uh, yeah, I mean, so long as the Bank of Canada continues to expand the money supply in order to finance deficit spending on the part of the federal government, we're going to have economic problems, and we really need a healthier money supply.
When we look ahead, we see a future where inflation is likely to be a bigger threat than it has been in the last few decades. We know that many of the forces that have helped
Yeah, I agree.
inflation in the past could fade or even reverse. We know that changing demographics and the economic impacts of climate change will tend to put upward pressure on prices, and persistent global trade tensions are also raising the risk of future inflation.
No, none of that is valid or accurate. It's because of the deficit spending of the federal government.
About a topic that's critical to our ability to navigate a future that may be more prone to inflation, and that's productivity.
I mean, I mean, some of those things could have an impact uh, on prices, maybe, um, but it could also have an impact in both directions. Like something like the baby boomers retiring. I mean, that's going to be on net quite beneficial for people who are working if you have, this added class of just consumers that aren't producing anything. That's going to be substantial benefit for people who are engaged in production, since there's going to be so much more demand for their products.
Productivity is a way to inoculate our economy against future inflation. An economy with low productivity can only grow so fast before inflation starts to set in. But an economy with strong productivity can have faster growth, more jobs, and higher wages with less risk of inflation. That's why I want to talk about Canada's long-standing poor record on productivity and convince you just how big of a problem it is. You know those signs that say, in an emergency, break the glass? Well, it's time to break the glass. Canada's labour productivity eked out a small gain at the end of last year, according to StatsCan. But that gain came after 6 straight quarters where productivity fell. Of course, the pandemic was a major disruptor for the economy. And
this is absolutely very important line of thought, and she's correct. That productivity's flat and needs to increase.
During the pandemic, the resourcefulness and the ingenuity of Canadian businesses was put to full use. Companies adjusted their business models and their ways of working, and given how nimble our companies were, we thought productivity would improve coming out of the pandemic as firms found their footing and employees got trained back up. We did see that happen in the US, but
the problem is that you had these programs like CERB and all these subsidies to corporations, financed through a massive deficit. So like normally, what you want to do to grow the economy is to consume less and use that savings to invest in more capital in order to produce more. But we were doing the opposite during the pandemic. We weren't producing anything, and we were still consuming at the same level, and we were financing it all through deficit spending. So we were doing like the complete opposite of what you want for a more productive economy.
it hasn't happened here in Canada. In fact, the level of productivity in Canada's business sector is more or less unchanged from where it was 7 years ago. Lots of people have been sounding the alarm, but it can be hard to feel a sense.
Also, first of all, like the whole concept of aggregate productivity doesn't really make sense because you're adding up a bunch of unlike units and coming up with a total.
Sense of urgency about an abstract concept like productivity. Most people, when they hear we need to improve productivity, think they're
First, what they do is they use price as like the equal unit, but you can't just add up like 15 cars and then 10 toasters and come up with some meaningful figure, even if you convert to price beforehand.
being told you have to work harder, work longer hours, take less time off. But that's not the case. That's not the message. Labor productivity measures how much an economy produces per hour of work. Increasing productivity means finding ways for people to create more value during the time they're at work. This is something to aim for, not something to fear. When a company increases productivity, it means more revenue, which allows it to pay higher wages to its workers without having to raise prices. Ultimately, higher productivity helps the economy generate more wealth for everyone. The bottom line is that benefits from raising productivity are there, no matter what your role is, for workers, for businesses.
Okay, but how do you raise productivity?
I'll come back to a bit later. First, I want to spend some time spelling out the factors that determine productivity. I'll review Canada's record for clues about how we could improve, and I'll talk about what we can all do to raise Canada's productivity and make our economy more resilient. Economists will tell you there's 3 factors that determine how productive a workforce is. There's capital intensity, there's labor composition, and then there's multi-factor productivity. These are the kinds of words that can make non-economists tune out, but they're important, and once you get the hang of them, they're not that complicated. So I want to take just a quick look at each one. Capital intensity is about equipping workers with better tools. If you run a snow clearing business and your workers are able to clear more driveways if they have solid shovels that don't break easily. Of course, if you give them a snowblower, they'll be able to clear even more driveways and invest in pickup trucks with plows, and they can do even more. This is sort of the easiest way to think about capital intensity in physical terms like machinery and equipment. But some of the biggest advances in productivity have come through investments in computing power, the ability to move and use information more efficiently. The smartphone we all have in front of us has more computing power than the spaceship that took the first humans to the moon. It's advances like this that continue to put more capability in the hands of employees, giving them the ability to be more productive across a wide range of industries. The second factor, labor composition, measures the skill level of people in the labor force and how much training they receive. The more skills people have, of course, the more value they can generate on the job. And then finally, there's multi-factor productivity, kind of a fancy term, but it basically just means how efficiently are the other 2 factors, capital and labor, being used. It usually refers to intangible things like how much competition there is in the economy, economies of scale, and management practices. It can also refer to how companies are using or taking advantage of technologies like machine learning and artificial intelligence. So those are the ingredients of productivity. Now, when people measure productivity, they usually look at either its level, so how much value an economy is producing for every hour worked, or they look at its growth rate. And Canada has been struggling on both of those measures for a while now. Back in 1984, productivity in Canada's economy was 88% of that in the US. Now, that doesn't sound good, but the real problem is that by 2022, Canadian productivity had fallen to just 71%, so we're going the wrong direction. Over the same time, we also fell behind our other G7 peers relative to performance against the US. So improving productivity in Canada needs to be a priority for everyone. And there's 2 basic strategies to do it. One is to have the economy focus more resources on the industries that add greater value. The other strategy is to keep doing what we're doing, keep doing the jobs we're doing, but to do them more efficiently.
Or there's a third strategy, which is to stop debasing the currency so that people are more incentivized to save, and then from this greater supply of savings, you'll have more funds available for investment, which get channeled into capital. And as she said, the first determinant of productivity is the average capital stock per worker.
Ideally, we'd use a combination of both of these strategies to lead to an economy with strong productivity growth and a larger concentration in high-value industries. Unfortunately, our recent
In other news, Mexico has a new president, Claudia Sheinbaum. And actually, the last Mexican president was surprisingly solid for a leftist. So this chart shows the percentage increase in total government expenditure, gross, not adjusted for GDP or anything like that. So 2018 is when he became president, and after that, negative negative expenditure increases, so decreases in expenditure up until 2022, so well into the pandemic. He in 2020, I believe it was, he cut government salaries by 25%, uh, closed a number of departments, and just in general, an extreme fiscal hawk, and sort of surprising because he was left leaning, but just very sound record on the economy, or at least when it came to government spending. At the same time, he did make efforts towards the sort of soft nationalization of the electricity sector. So certainly not a uh, economic um, libertarian by any means. All right, so here is her 100-point platform. So the first one, I will govern with the obligatory division between political power and economic power. That actually sounds really solid. Not sure what she means by it exactly, or her campaign, or whatever, whoever produced this document. But like that's basically what libertarians advocate for, is the division between political power and economic power, or as Ayn Rand put it, the separation of economy and state. So the government shouldn't intervene in the market economy. It shouldn't subsidize and pick winners and losers, but just have sort of an economic free for all. I will never submit to any economic, political, or foreign power. I will always work for the supreme interest of the people of Mexico and the nation. I don't know, that sounds fine to me. But as always, the devil is in the details. What is this? What are these uh, broad statements of principles translate to in actual policies or laws? We will govern with the maxim of Mexican humanism for the good of all, first the poor. So what does that mean? How does that translate into policies? It sounds all right. Got to look after the poor. Obviously, if people are rich, they're doing all right. But at the same time, that sounds like an endorsement of welfareism, which or of the welfare state, which can have some issues, like you're imposing a lot of taxes in order to fund the welfare state, and that actually creates more poverty. So again, the principle sounds all right, but you have to be careful about the implementation, because just because something's done in the name of the poor doesn't mean it actually helps out the poor. We will be a sensitive, close government of territory and not of the desk. This is lacking in the translation. I will continue visiting all the states of the republic. We have a good teacher. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that's. We gotta fire this translator. We will be a sensitive, close government of territory and not of the desk. I think this one's too bungled in the translation and too vague anyway. Could mean a lot of things. We will guarantee freedom of expression, of the press, of assembly, of mobilization. Okay. These are rights that I support. Human rights will be respected, and we will never use the force of the state to repress the people of Mexico. Okay. That sounds solid. I'm on board so far. 4 points in, but I like what I'm seeing. We will respect and guarantee respect for the religious, political, social, cultural, and sexual freedom of our society. Sure. Freedom's very important. As a libertarian, I am very interested in freedom. I consider liberty to be the most important political ideal. And we'll fight any form of discrimination, no racism, and no classism in Mexico. Yeah, that sounds fine, I guess. Uh, I could see some potential problems, maybe, in how you fight discrimination, but they seem like fine goals. Or what does that mean? No classism. How is that going to be enforced, or is it just something that you're aiming towards, just a goal that you have? These are sort of very vague. I would rather some more straight policy proposals as opposed to. I mean, anybody can say that they're anti-racist or anti-classist, and what does that really mean at the end of the day in terms of policies? You know, like this seems like a lot of virtue signaling here, to be honest. We will protect, number six, we will protect and defend the rights of our countrymen, heroes and heroines on the other side of the border. We will be respectful of the United States government. We are the main trading partner. There will always be goodwill for coordination, but it's up to us to also demand respect for our sovereignty, for the Mexicans on both sides of the border. Coordination, yes. Subordination, no. We will never bow our heads. Okay? Foreign policy. This one I like. Foreign policy will follow the constitutional principles of free self-determination of peoples, non-intervention, and fraternity with all the peoples of the world. So that, sign me up. I'm on board for number seven, 100%. Trade and commerce with all nations, entangling alliances with none. We will promote the reform of the electoral system that strengthens participatory democracy, the revocation of mandate. I don't know what that means. The decision of the people through consultations. Okay, I like more direct democracy. I'm in favor of that. The reduction of the cost of the INE in the electoral court, and the election of electoral councillors and magistrates by popular vote. So they want to elect judges, which I don't have a strong opinion on. Uh, except that it's kind of funny when you see on American TV and the judges are campaigning like, uh, I don't know. As a Canadian, it's amusing to me because we don't have that. I don't know if it's good or bad. I'm sure it's bad. I mean, but having some government official appoint them's not much better. But I don't know. Just like judges campaigning on ads on daytime TV. I don't know. We will send an initiative for constitutional reform to recover the slogan that gave rise to the Mexican Revolution and was reflected in the Constitution of 17, effective suffrage, no re-election. There should be no re-election to any elected office starting with the next presidential election in 2030. That would be awesome if we should get that in Canada, where no parliament person, member of parliament, could be re-elected. That would be really solid. Plus, we'd save a lot of money on pensions. That is what we need. We should do that. And right. Translate. We will lead an honest government without influence, corruption, or impunity. Make a government upright and free of corruption. To do this, we are going to establish an exemplary public service oversight model. Okay. I'll believe it when I see it, but as a statement of principles. Seems fine. We are going to maintain Republican austerity, financial and fiscal discipline. Luxuries and privileges will not return. And here, as I said earlier, the former president was pretty good. This is his protege. Maybe she will maintain that fiscal austerity. Luxuries and privileges will not return. There will be no presidential plane. Nice. There will be no presidential staff. Nice. And we will not recover the privileges of the government. All right, that appeals to me as an extreme fiscal conservative, as a fiscal libertarian, if you will. The autonomy of the Bank of Mexico and the reasonable balance between debt and GDP will be maintained. Good. There will be no remission of taxes for large taxpayers, and we will continue the fight against tax evasion. I'm on the side of the tax evaders. I think taxes are too high, and if you can evade them, God bless you. But whatever. That's not. That's what any politician would say. We will launch the most important simplification and digitalization of procedures in the history of Mexico. Put the government online, sure. Simplify it. Maybe bring the cost down. Make it easier to access for the people. It seems fine. Especially if you're not paying ridiculous prices to do it. The gasoline prices are not going to return. There will be no increase in electricity rates, nor in domestic gas prices above inflation. How are you going to ensure that? Is she going to impose price controls? And if so, won't isn't there the danger that this will lead to shortages? That's what Jimmy Carter found when the U.S. tried price controls on gasoline. So that's a potential problem. How exactly does she plan to ensure that gas prices stay down? We'll continue to build equality for indigenous and Afro-Mexican peoples and communities. They're going to fight for the approval of the constitutional reform presented by the president. We'll continue with the justice plans. We'll promote the recognition of cultures and languages. Well, anyway, we're more than an hour in, so I'm going to take a break, and thank you for tuning in, and have a great day.